In our last episode of Debunking Your Favorite Gun Myths, we covered the M1 Ping. We covered transparent mags, 5.56 designed to wound, racking a shotgun being enough to scare away a home invader, and of course, porcelain Glock. So what are we going to be debunking today? Stay tuned to find out. Let's roll into it. Welcome back, everybody. Clint today with Classic Firearms, here to bring you part 2 of debunking our favorite or popular gun myths. And yes, we've already covered a couple of them in our part 1, so go check that video out if you haven't seen it. But let's go ahead and roll into this one. Now, I want to shout out again my friends over at probably my favorite Facebook page. This is Mid-Tier Gun Snobs hyphen Don't Be Poor V3.0, and that's right, I put the whole title in there. So admins, John, everybody, you're going to be getting a huge influx of well, people wanting to be part of the group now, so that'll be fun. You're welcome. All right, now let's go ahead and roll into number 5, silencers. This is one that I thought was pretty funny, and it is: silencers are for assassins and you need a special license to own them. Or simply, they're just illegal. And these little guys, these little mufflers for your guns, they're not illegal to own. They're not just for assassins, and also they don't completely silence your gun. So let's go ahead and break this down really quick. What ultimately is a silencer? A silencer is a muzzle device, an attachment for your firearm that threads on either directly to the muzzle of your rifle, or usually there's also a QD muzzle device that it can slip over, thread onto, lock onto, whatever the attachment style is. What happens ultimately when the bullet exits through the silencer, the bullet is pushed through with all sorts of hot burning gases that build up pressure, that build up velocity for that bullet to escape. Now, once the bullet exits the barrel of the gun and enters the silencer, all those gases are now trapped into either baffles or different little chambers and valleys and all sorts of stuff to ultimately slow down the gases from escaping. And on this Huxworks Flow 762 that you see right here, all these gases are also being ventilated with their flow-through technology out the front of the gun, and in a direction that still tightens the silencer down, which is pretty cool too. So you never have to worry about this one, you know, falling off the gun or being shot off, which is concerning. So why does it slow down the gases though? Well, that loud bang that you're hearing when you pull the trigger, there's actually a couple of different sounds being made. There's the primer being struck and igniting the powder. There's the cold, well, I should say the hot gases hitting the cold air, which is another reaction. And then if you have a supersonic projectile, then there's the actual supersonic crack, the breaking of the sound barrier by the projectile itself. There's also the functioning of the firearm that creates noise too. So there's that, if it's a semi-auto or full auto. If it's a bolt action, then you just got the pulling of the trigger and, you know, firing pin, striking primer, and so on and so forth. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but again, I just wanted to get this one out of the way because ultimately all this does is slow down those gases to, well, not make such a loud report at the end of the gun. And it's also, well, going to make it a safer thing because you don't have to worry about ear protection as much. It doesn't mean at the end of the day that you can shoot without ear protection, because depending on what you're shooting, sometimes it's just going to be loud no matter what. And it's not so quiet like you see in the movies. Like I keep referencing John Wick, where Keanu and Common are shooting at each other like in the mall or whatever, and was it the train station? I don't remember. But at the end of the day, it's like, y'all, first of all, the bullets impacting all around, that's going to make noise. The actions of the gun, that's going to make noise. And yes, it's still going to make some sort of crack, some sort of sound just from shooting. We've shot suppressed a lot on this channel, so as you can imagine, we hear it all the time and we know the difference. Now, it's not to say that you can't get pretty freaking close with some subsonic 300 blackout, 22s even, things like that, and you can make some really quiet guns at the end of the day, but the patent by Maxim was for a silencer, not for a suppressor, even though that is often what they're referred to, because it suppresses sound and flash. It's ultimately calling it what it does versus its technical name, silencer. I know this was a long one, but it was a fun one to get into, and you don't need a special license per se. You just got to pay a $200 tax to get a tax stamp and approval to own one, and that's that. And you shouldn't have to do that. Hashtag repeal the NFA, ATF sucks. Let's move on to the next one. Number 4 on the list of myths that we'll be debunking today is one of my personal favorites because, well, we're talking about MILSPEC. Oh yeah, this one is great. MILSPEC means it's tougher than anything, and that's it. First of all, what is MILSPEC, military specification? And I'm just going to read you a quick little paragraph from Guns and Ammo magazine. This is perfect. This is exactly what you need to know. MILSPEC is an abbreviated term that stands for military specification. For a firearm to be MILSPEC, every aspect has to meet a criteria defined by the military to often include dimensions, materials, testing of parts, etc. A MILSPEC part and/or small arms system is ultimately approved by a United States government inspector. So all it is a military specification that has to be met in order for it to be commonly used or dispersed or issued to service members, right? I mean, technically a meal ready to eat, an MRE, which, most of them suck, is MILSPEC. There is a specification that the military requires as far as calorie input and everything else that has to be involved or in one of those MREs. Same thing with parts, same thing with radios, same thing with aircraft. There's all sorts of a different military specification across the board depending on what area or industry we're working in. And the gun industry loves to take something like this FNM16, pretty much identical to what I'm issued, is MILSPEC. Right? Because this was approved. The only difference between this clone and a real one is the fact that this doesn't have a third position and no 3-round burst, right? So, there's that. But with that being said, military specification, MILSPEC, to be sold as tougher than anything, that's a little far-fetched. And here's why. Because there's plenty of things, dude, that commercial rifles there's plenty of things that commercial rifles do better, put it that way. Like, for instance, ergonomics. The A2 grip is MILSPEC, and it sucks, right? So just because something says MILSPEC on it doesn't mean, military uses it. It's got to meet military requirements, this, that, and the other. The military just wants something to get by at an affordable cost that they can mass produce to give to a bunch of people to be cannon fodder at the end of the day, all right? So, ask me how I really feel. So, I would much rather take some of my commercially available rifles out and use those sometimes, right? Because I know what they're capable of and I work with them more. And on top of that, if you ever take a look at some of our MILSPEC rifles that we have in our armory, there's enough play between the upper and lower receiver to think that, wow, you can see daylight not only through it, but you'd blind yourself from the sun if you were to look directly at it from your upper and lower in that gap there. It's there you go. And there's a lot of other companies that, don't have military contracts, or perhaps some that do, law enforcement contracts, so on and so forth, that, they have tighter tolerances, they might be more accurate. A military specification might be, hey, we just need this rifle to shoot this caliber and have a 4 MOA shot group at 500 yards. We don't need anything more than that. A commercial market will say, wow, that sucks. Why won't we make it sub MOA at 500 yards? Rolling on to our next gun myth. So this one is 9mm will blow your lung out / 45 ACP is more deadlier than 9mm. So 9mm, this little guy will blow your lung out. I assume meaning it's going to take your lung that's currently inside of your body and now make it external. And hyphenated 45 ACP is stronger than 9mm. Oh boy. All right, so without getting into too much technical data and specifications, let's go ahead and debunk this. First of all, 9mm is a super common cartridge that's been around for, over 100 years now. And I think we have a lot of evidence and history to prove that individuals that may have found a 9mm projectile find its way inside of them typically don't have organs completely removed from the inside of the body to the outside. We can see that in the history of war, and perhaps even in just about every law enforcement video or gang shooting in Chicago. So there's a lot to be said about the 9mm and its effectiveness, especially in modern cartridges and modern loads, especially for self-defense, hollow points, so on and so forth, right? Which brings me up to 45 ACP. 45 ACP, obviously a much fatter, you can see that pretty clearly there. Camera has a hard time focusing on such, oh, that's not too bad. There we go. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So there you have it, right? 45 ACP, 9mm. Now, one would think, well, this is obviously a much larger projectile, so therefore it has to be more, what was the exact terminology? 45 ACP is more deadly. Here's the way I look at it. 45 ACP does have a larger surface area, is a larger projectile, but moving much slower. Okay, 9mm, obviously a smaller projectile, but moving much quicker. Either way, these are two foreign objects making their way into your body at a pretty decent speed. How do you rate which one's more deadly? I would say perhaps where you got shot, not so much by what you got shot with. You see what I'm saying? Shot placement matters. If I were to take a 45 ACP into the hand, but a 9mm into, I don't know, the off switch, I would say in that aspect, the 9mm would be deadly, more deadly. If the roles were reversed, I would probably say the 45 ACP was more deadly. So it's which one's faster, which one's fatter, which one's got more knockdown power, as they say. Knockdown power, that's a whole other thing that we can get into later, but at the end of it all, 9mm, it might puncture your lung, but it's not going to blow your lung completely out of your body. As for 45 ACP being more deadly than 9mm, there's a reason why I think a lot of law enforcement, a lot of militaries have gone to 9mm. That's not to say that 45 ACP isn't effective, but with the modern loads, modern projectiles that we have for 9mm, along with 45, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't say that 45 is exactly more deadly. Shot placement, that's more deadly. Let's roll into our next one. So rolling into our number 2 here, This one gets me. This one cracks me up quite a bit. M855 is armor piercing. 5.56 comes in a variety of different rounds. There are such things as armor piercing 5.56 rounds. There are such things as, precision 5.56. Everybody loves that Black Hills Mark 262 77 grain stuff, right? There's also frangible, there's tracer, there's blanks, there's all sorts of different 5.56 variations and availability, right? But the green tip, the standard issue military cartridge M855 AO59 Dodic, this guy is not armor piercing. We have heard this in so many different videos, especially many years ago when YouTube was just a cancer, especially around gun content, that green tip ammunition could actually penetrate through tanks, that there was it has a steel penetrator, and so therefore the copper jacket would act like a sabot round penetrating through armor, and then the steel penetrator would go through. Insert that Adam Sandler, Happy Gilmore. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having heard what you just said. So, because what this isn't is armor piercing. It is a steel core penetrator, ultimately there to add a little bit of weight. It is a 62 grain projectile, but now that it has that steel core penetrator, what that is there to do is to actually make it a little bit more barrier blind. That's not saying armor piercing, barrier blind. Think about, walls. Think about cinder blocks. Think about something that you could effectively use as cover, now turning into concealment, because this little guy is able to penetrate a little bit deeper, especially if you think about soft tissue. This is going to perform and penetrate deeper into soft tissue. So if you've got somebody that's wearing layers of clothing, not so much body armor, because we have shot this at level 3, level 3 plus, level 4, a lot, and it doesn't penetrate, at least through guard dog body armor. Can't speak for everybody out there. So that's not to say that it won't penetrate through some armor, like armor that's not rated to stop 5.56, like 3A, or level 2, level 1, things like that. That's just gonna go through it and make Swiss cheese. But therefore, technically it would be armor piercing, right? But it's not going through something that's rated to stop 5.56 to begin with, whether it has a green tip or not. So it has this steel core penetrator in it that's made to be a little bit more barrier blind. Think about shooting through windshields of vehicles, shooting through vehicles, things like that, to make sure that this stays on target a little bit better. There's not so much deviation and deflection. That being said, it doesn't do that great of a job. And it's 5.56, so it's not gonna do that great of a job anyway. That's not to say that it's not gonna be going through walls or anything anything like that. This cartridge, the 55 grain without the steel core penetrator, or the 62 grain without the steel core penetrator, is still a very fast round and has a very effective effect on target because of that velocity. That doesn't mean this is armor piercing though. It just makes it help go through some everyday items a little bit easier. And it's also not that accurate of a round at the end of the day. Like, it's accurate enough, it's fine, it'll get the job done. We're shooting at, shooting out of 14.5-inch barrels at 500 yards and still getting expert, so that's cool. But it's just a basic round. Okay, with that, there's one more for an honorable mention that, I don't want to take away from part 3 or anything like that, but every now and then I'll read something or hear about something from our buddies over at Mid-Tier Snobs, and I'm like, really? Because I've never heard that, and I don't think it'll make it on the list for our next top 5 gun myths to be debunked. But before we roll into our number 1, I just thought this one was pretty good. The K98/Type 99 Arasaka was designed to be able to shoot 30-06 so they can use our ammo. I've never heard this. I don't know if somebody in the group was just making something up just to go along with it, but here we are. First of all, that is completely incorrect because both of these rifles are chambered in, well, their own inherent cartridges to different loads. And I do believe if you were to try to throw a 30-06 on either one of them, you'd probably have a bad day, I would think, you know what I mean? So there's that. The 8mm round of the K98 is fantastic. It's wonderful. It's powerful. It gets the job done, but I don't think they're the same as 30-06. So there's that. Now let's roll into our number 1 for part 2 of debunking popular gun myths. Number 1, the SKS has more knockdown power than the AK-47. It's not so much that we're talking about the SKS having more knockdown power than the AK-47 as it is we're just talking about knockdown power. Now, some people might hear this and say, oh yeah, well that makes sense because the SKS, though it still shoots the same caliber, 7.62x39, it does have a longer barrel, 20-inch versus a 16-inch AK. So therefore, because, well, we just know this, a 20-inch barrel will have a higher velocity and it'll have built up more pressure by the time that bullet exits the barrel. And we've actually done this test. We've gotten different velocity readings on the SKS and the AK-47, and we do see that the 7.62x39 cartridge is exiting, we all use the same ammo of course, is exiting the SKS at a faster rate than, or a faster speed than it is out of the AK, which makes sense. But kind of like going back to the 9mm versus 45 ACP discussion that we had just a couple minutes ago, how do you scale or measure knockdown power? That's my entire thing. I have fallen guilty to using the term knockdown power, but I don't know where that got started or anything like that, but how do you measure knockdown power at the end of the day? Now you can see what type of effect a projectile might have on soft tissue when it hits, right? When it makes impact. And we can see that through ballistic gel. Ballistic Dummy Labs makes those really realistic dummies that we've shot before with Guard Dog and had a really good time with it. So with that, it makes me wonder though, the SKS versus the AK-47, right? The SKS having more knockdown power because it has a slightly longer barrel. Is that true in this case, right? Well, is it true that the 7.62x39 cartridge has a higher velocity out of the SKS and the AK? Yes. But at the end of the day, you're still getting hit by a 7.62x39. You might just be able to take that a little bit further with the SKS than the AK. So either way, you're getting shot. As far as knockdown power goes, can somebody explain to me, how would we judge that? Because if you were to compare a 7.62x39 versus a 7.62x39, exact same projectile, exact same load from the exact same manufacturer, but one's just coming out of the SKS, one's coming out of the AK, I think you'd pretty much have the same effect on target. So I don't see that being true at the end of the day. So let me know what you guys think about that. Knockdown power as far as that goes, obviously different projectiles and cartridges are going to have a different effect on target, but as I've already mentioned before, depending on how one might be loaded over the other, well, that could also give it a little bit of an advantage, but also shot placement. That's a big deal. All right, so we'll leave it off there, guys. Thank you to everyone who's contributed, and we are looking to carry on this series because there's a lot of it out there. And comment down below any and everything that you may have heard that you think is just absolutely ridiculous or could be argued to be true. Comment down below and we might use it in part 3 of debunking popular gun myths. We hope you enjoyed part 2. We'll leave it off there, guys.